we're looking pretty similar. And
Okay, let's do this.
They don't know what I know.
Welcome back to another Zengineering podcast. I'm Adam.
yay! I'm Brian.
This is the first time we've done this like slotted into our work day. It's like the first thing on my schedule of stuff I got to get my personal shit together in time to do.
I did some down dogs already.
I realized that this is the same time of day that my neighbor, I guess while getting ready for work, really loudly listens to television news. So it's like pops the TV on and puts it loud enough that they can hear it in any room.
Oh, nice.
And I seethe.
What channel do they listen to? Is it a good one?
I can't really tell. It's just a murmur. I've caught snippets of, like discernible audio that make me think it's something like CNN.
All day news,
Like
baby.
audio stings and stuff, but it's all very muffled through the door. The only problem is it's usually during the time of day when I'm trying to meditate. And so, like, it wouldn't be a big deal if I were doing normal, just morning stuff. But when I'm actually trying to sit in silence, gets kind of
Dude,
obnoxious.
that's the whole point.
I know. I'm also aware of that. And so I try not to seethe.
That's the worst. It's the worst comment. I say that to my fiance all the time, and she's like, "Shut the fuck up, dude. Just let me be annoyed when shit's annoying."
But that's the same point we made in the health episode, like meditation, the idea of practice. It is practice. The practice is forcing yourself back from that place of like, oh my God, the news. Okay, ignore it.
Sometimes seething could be your meditation too.
Ooh.
Because I'm pretty chill, but I seethe an awful lot. I kind of keep it. I like seethe the real chill, though,
Seethe
Sometimes
is a great word. In fact, I structured that whole bit because I realized that I was seething. And I was like, that's a great word. I'm going to put this in the podcast.
Seething. It's got a lot of good sounds, a lot of good frequencies to it. Deep sounds and windy sounds, and
It's great. It's great word choice for the
spitty sound.
image that you want to go with it. That I'm just sitting there like, fuck you guys and your goddamn news with your Okay, so that's probably about as zen as we're gonna get this particular podcast.
Yeah.
Now we're taking it back kind of old school. I feel like we haven't done one of these in a while, which is funny to say because we've only been at this a year. So old school's like, it's still the same year numerically.
Long time. I'm getting pictures from a year ago on Facebook, and I don't remember them. So it's an infinitely long time ago.
Infinitely long time ago. But we're going to kind of dig in deep on one that we, this is maybe the third or fourth time we've tried to do it.
I think fourth.
And ironically, we keep having bad audio because the topic itself is audio.
Audio.
Like the technology world of recorded sound.
Sounds.
We decided to do this one again because Apple recently announced that they're dropping the headphone jack on their next phone.
Oh, no. What
Which
will we do?
ostensibly is them doubling down on wireless technology. Although, there's an adapter and certainly it's still wired. And there are wired thoughts to what they're up to as well, because you can still plug in through the lightning port. But we thought, what better time for SEO purposes to discuss audio technology and audio quality, since it's been on the list. Like we tried to do it for the fourth episode?
Yeah, it was real early. We did it right after we were going to do a series of like photography, audio, and then video because they like build up to each other. But we didn't.
And we kept screwing up the audio, like fully by mistake. Like we were really trying to do things right, and then we would have like a weird echo or a mic that like we would accidentally record with the laptop mic, even though the nice podcast mic is right in front of you, and we'd have this weird offset of
I'm glad that we've waited again, though, because I listened to those early technological episodes, and they're good, but they're not as like fun. So I want tech to be fun. That's part of what we're doing this for. So
Well, I think that's back when we weren't doing this on a timer. So we weren't having that thing where it was like, okay, we only can get in the amount, we can only go as deep as is allowed for 15 minutes on a bit or whatever. And, you know,
this is scheduled. This is a scheduled event now. It's just on my work calendar. So
right, which is
got
good.
it. It's great.
Okay, so I thought we'd start from the idea of like just audio, like real world sounds is what the note says, right? So
Real world sounds.
audio, music, albums, CDs, MP3s, whatever. Like it's all just a means of reproducing a naturally occurring phenomenon.
Same
So
thing every
from-
episode's about.
From reproducing reality, right? So what's that reality that it's reproducing?
It's reproducing sound waves moving through the atmosphere. Well, usually through the atmosphere, also through other things. If your head's down on the ground or up against like a railroad tie, weird things like that.
I was going to say, that's, what
inside a conch shell,
water,
you know, where the ocean resides.
Where the ocean resides. All
Or
of it, the whole thing.
a conch shell, depending on how pretentious you are.
Sucks to your ass, Mar. So like when someone talks or a speaker makes a noise, it's creating a wave through the gas that we're breathing all day, right? So we don't think of it because it's not resisting us the way that water does, or the way that, say, a railroad tie does if you try to push through it. Right? You're not going anywhere. But like it's, you know, there is substance around us all the time. And the same way that a wave can travel through water and you can watch it when you throw a stone in, sound travels through that gas and it hits our eardrum and vibrates, for brevity's sake, sensors attached to your eardrum that then relay that impulse to your brain, and your brain is able to make two ways of it based on the fluctuations in that sensor.
Yeah, that was a good computer explanation.
Right?
I want to give a visual and I want to give a physical example. So I'll start with the visual because people they're probably sitting in their cars or wherever, I don't know, maybe running. So the visual is just kind of the classic throw a stone in a lake and you see a wave form. We talk about waves, electromagnetic waves, we talk about radio waves and all this stuff, and sound waves, they're actually a different thing. Sound waves are just physical medium moving. So if you throw a rock in the water, you get this really cool two-dimensional representation of what a sound wave looks like in the air. You see these ripples moving through the water. That's all your ear is picking up and sensing. It's parts inside of your ear are physically being moved by those waves that were produced by the rock hitting the water, or in this case, produced by whatever's making sound in the air. Your eardrum moves, your brain measures that movement, and it says, hey, I'm hearing a sound. I'm going to produce this thing in these signals inside your brain, and you're going to perceive them as sound, and you're going to be taught that they're language or they're song or they're birds or they're wind blowing through the trees. So that's kind of a visual way to think about it. It happens in 3 dimensions, which is harder to visualize because we can't usually see that stuff. But the other way to kind of check this out is to go stand by a fan, which is what I'm doing right now, or go run really fast and you'll hear the hissing of wind, you know? That is like waves blowing past you and creating sound. That's the air physically moving, and you'll both feel the air move and you'll hear noise. So
what you're talking about, that wave, is they call it a pressure wave sometimes, which is what it is a change in the pressure in that physical medium that you talked about, right? Mm-hmm. So you can cause that same pressure change just by moving your head back and forth really fast, and your brain doesn't know the difference, right? So you're altering the pressure of the medium around your head.
Everyone do it with us.
And because we're so used to motion, the brain usually tunes that stuff out, but it is part of the sensory mechanism. That's how you know that your head is even moving, which, without going down the VR rabbit hole, is part of why VR works. Because of how reliant on sight and sound your brain is to make sense of your surroundings.
Yeah, your ears got little biological accelerometers in it, measure your body's orientation in your head and where you are and directions sounds are coming from and all kinds of cool stuff. So you know, the cell phone's been inside of us for forever.
Right. The cell phone.
we've just created a digital version. The biological cell phone's been there forever.
Except we don't have the magnetometer. Like, so we can't tell which way is north.
Arguably we do. You can train yourself to know which direction.
Yeah, I guess so. I generally pretty reliably know where north is, but for me it's a matter of relation. Like, I just am always aware of where it is, so I remember it based on changes. Whereas I think dogs actually have a mechanism that senses magnetic north. And they use it to like orient themselves when they poop.
Yeah, a bunch of animals do.
Bam!
God damn it.
11 minutes. Poop.
Oh man, someday that'll be an infographic. It'll be every poop topic, its time, and its episode. And no one will want to see it because it'll just be little pictures of steaming cartoon poop.
When sound is recorded and then delivered to you via whatever, delivery mechanism, it's just a reproduction of that pressure wave, right?
Yeah, it's in theory it's the same thing again. This is a cool example of where our technology captures reality and then tries really hard to reproduce it exactly, which is very different than like photography because I can't actually physically reproduce the room yet. You're just seeing a two-dimensional picture of it. But sound, we put speakers out there and we try to at least send that same sound wave out so that you really are experiencing the actual thing that happened. That's hard. That's very hard to do. And we don't really do it, but that's
and so because I think it'll be relevant a bit later, but now seems like the time to talk about it. What's the difference between, okay, so here I think is the question. What's the physical difference that causes sound to travel slower than light, than electricity through a wire? Because this will pertain to the conversation about wireless versus wired.
Sure. So you can't transmit sound any faster than that sound wave will move through the medium in which it's produced. So for instance, when you throw a rock in a lake and watch that ripple move, that just is as fast as that ripple is going to move because that is the energy the rock transferred into the water. Same thing happens when you make a sound. There's a certain speed that sound waves move through Earth's atmosphere, which is why you have that trick of when you see lightning, you can count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and that gives you this like rough approximation of how far away the lightning is. Because there's a known speed for light, which is almost instant on Earth at the distances we deal with. And then there's a known speed for sound to travel. And so sound is a physical thing moving through this medium of air. It's a very like organic thing. It's very different than when we start to talk about radio waves and like electrons, electricity flowing through wires. Those are just very different. You can't transmit sound directly. This is where you get to the translation between analog and digital. It's when you change how we transmit it. So when I'm just talking to you, that's considered analog. We're just making noise and air is moving around and moving our eardrums. When I talk into a microphone and we convert it to electricity and send it into something and then send it back out through a speaker, it went through this digital space where we converted it into something else. And that's kind of, digital is not exactly the right conversion there, but we convert it into a different medium to transfer it. And so electricity just happens to flow really, 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 really fast, close to the speed of light. And radio waves are light. Radio waves are the same thing as the physical light that you see. So they go at the same speed as that. So
I think this is a perfect segue into the next chunk, which is to talk about the recording and reproduction process. Because if you start from this idea that, like, when you hear digital versus analog, you think like, oh, it's a record player versus my fancy iPhone, right? But like, for you to hear it, sound has to be analog. And
Yeah.
even the term analog comes from the idea that it is analogous to what existed at the creation of that sound.
Oh, cool.
So, right?
I
Chasing
didn't
Latin
know this
roots,
was a.
like
I didn't know
like
this was
I'm
a linguist
educated.
podcast. We should contact that Hot for Words girl. See if she wants to get on an episode. We know you're a
So
listener.
the sound wave is like the idea of it being analog. And if you think about analog ways of recording things, they store the information in a different way that is limited by different things. But let's go back and start from, you make a sound wave out of your mouth, out of an instrument, out of whatever, and it hits a diaphragm in your microphone, which by various mechanisms that aren't worth getting into of different complexity and quality, basically they're all a version of a sensor, usually a magnet, is vibrated by the sound wave hitting it, and then that's recorded as electrical impulse. Does that sound good so far?
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on inside your microphone. Sometimes.
Sometimes, right?
I don't really know
modern
mics well.
microphones are functioning that way, right? And
Yeah, but
if you were going
it's
to
pretty
use that,
straightforward.
if you were going to use that to make a record, which would be analog, you would actually use the sound waves to jiggle a needle, and that needle would actually etch those jiggles into a wax cylinder or a vinyl record or something like that.
Yeah, you could like, records are really interesting because of the physicality of how they work. They don't go into a weird realm like even like tapes. Like a tape deck uses magnetism to read stuff, but records are just like, it's like caveman tech. They like scraped the sound into the wall of the cave and then reproduced it with a little cone they would drag along the wall. It's cool. And it's
But when
old
you
school
listen
tech.
to a record, like, people say that they persist because they're a particular type of approximation of the sound we're trying to reproduce, and they're stored in an analog format. So, like, if you want to break down the granularity of data storage in terms of reproducing that sound wave, like, it's constrained by the physical properties of the vinyl medium or the wax medium and how minute a jiggle in the needle that can record.
Yeah.
And it creates a much smoother profile if you were to break down the waveform, which makes it sound like audiophiles tend to describe it as sweeter,
and like softer.
which sort of just means that the waveform that's coming off of that, and thus the reproduction of the waves that hit your ear, is like smoother.
Real
Has a-
smooth.
Oh yeah, it's silky smooth.
Smooth and
It has
supple.
the consistency of that beautiful wave traveling across the pool. Whereas digital looks jagged as shit if you break it down.
Damn.
Now,
I like
why
that.
does it look so? So if what you're doing is shaking a magnet, and that magnet is transferring an electrical current to some sort of device that has to store that data, talk about the files it's stored in and like where that's coming from, sample rates, like what bit depth.
Yeah, so, well, I am currently seething a little bit just because I want to address the record quality question, but
Okay,
we'll
do
come
it.
to that a little later. Let's continue on how this stuff works. So,
Well, because I think
right, with
that's sort of a question of compression.
it comes, yeah, it's a bazillion things. It's interesting, but yeah, so a record, you're right. A record is kind of producing I use the term organically. I don't know if that means anything to anybody, but it's a very like smooth, organic representation of sound. Whether or not it's reproducing the sound better, it's in theory, it's like imagine like a smooth paintbrush, like drawing a pretty line across a table, like picture like calligraphy, you know, that it's just got that like smooth, organic look to it, and you can see all the bristles. Digital, when you digitize something, all of a sudden you can't think about it in terms of the whole anymore. You can't picture that beautiful stroke of the paintbrush growing across the canvas. You need to start thinking about, how do I reduce that to the tiniest amounts of information that I can store inside of a digital system, inside of a computer, transmit as digital information, and then on the other end somehow turn it back into an approximation of the waveform that you picked up with the original microphone. And there are a lot of steps to that, but one of them is
that
just...
means by necessity, because it's going to be read by a computer, whether you realize it or not, it's being read by a computer chip, even if it's a CD player, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, it's going
that
through
computer
processors.
has to read that information in a linear fashion. So it's going to be ones and zeros, which means you have to take this thing that's complex and nuanced, like the brush stroke you were just describing, and you have to cut it into something that can be presented in ones and zeros in a stream, right? So if there's a height to so if you're talking about this waveform and you want to know how wide it is and how high it is, you need to have values for that, and they can only be delivered one at a time. You can't just go plop, here's everything, right?
Right.
So it has to be cut into tiny pieces.
Yeah, and so in slicing it into little tiny pieces, you by necessity reach some sort of limit. You can't keep slicing it, because eventually basically the smaller of slices you take of that brush stroke or that sound recording to store it digitally, the smaller you take, the bigger the file size gets. And so say you have a beautiful 1 minute long song recording that you want to reproduce, right? If you only take a sample every second, you're only, the resolution of that song is going to be meaningless. You won't hear it. You won't hear words. You'll just hear like bit, 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 bit. It's not a thing. And so you have to break it down to a resolution that your brain doesn't notice that it's cut up anymore. And so on a CD, I think I always get these confused when I start to talk about them. You've got bit depth and you've got sampling rate, right?
Those are the two numbers you tend to see. And you see them because, like, Apple brags about it, right? And sample rate is usually, on a CD, I think 44.1 kilohertz.
Right? So you're taking 44,000 samples every second. So in that example I just did, one every second for a song, that's a minute long. You're actually taking 44,000 times 60. So what is that? A couple million million samples to reproduce that song. So every 44,000th of a second, the computer says, blip, I'm going to take whatever information exists at that, picture back to the brush stroke again. I'm going to take whatever information exists at that time period on that brush stroke, and I'm going to store it. I'm going to take another slice real quick, and another slice, and another slice. And then it stores that information. And then you get an approximation of the sound at each of those little steps. And the idea is, I, as a human, can't hear a 44,000th of a second. So a CD, for all intents and purposes, is the same as the sound coming into the microphone. I can't distinguish the sound. I can't hear that like blip, blip, blip. There's no digitizing. There's no loss of quality there.
And that's
even though technically there is.
Well, and that sort of goes back to the photography conversation, to the extent of, like, what's the max granularity of a negative, which is actually using molecules of, like, silver oxide to store data that clump together. So the clumps of those is what's going to limit how granular the information you're storing in that is. It's the same here, but because it's digital, like, we could run that higher and higher and higher. The only limit would be file size.
Right. Yeah,
So,
file
like,
size and processing speed.
Did you cover bit depth? I was looking up something on Wikipedia, so I got lost.
I didn't cover bit depth yet.
Okay, so bit depth refers to how much what it breaks down to is how much information is stored per sample. So every one of those 44,100 times a second that it goes bloop and checks that signal and records its state, the depth to which it's, like, so the number of bits with which it's allocating to record that signal will denote the continuum on which you can reproduce different tones, right? So if it's 24, that means it can faithfully reproduce this, like it has 24 slots worth of
2 to the
it could
24.
fall any 2 to the 24 slots with which it can fill. Here's how this sound is. And so here's the interesting thing to understand about that piece. What your ear is actually sensing when it picks up a sound wave and it turns it into data in your brain is not, bam, I got hit by a sound wave. It's the change from one wave to another.
Oh, interesting.
So bit depth relates to the granularity with which you can represent not that piece of data, but the change between that piece of data and the next one. And so if you have 24 squared to work with, that's way more than 16 squared, is way more than 10 squared in terms of how many slots it can change by and have it how much that sound wave can change from the previous wave and have it be represented in the data set that's being encoded as an audio file.
A good way to think about this, because conceptually I struggle to come up with what sampling, like what bit depth means for sound. A good way to think about it is color. And so a bit depth of 24 is I think roughly what most like modern color screens do. It's 2 to the 24th, so 2 to the power of 24, which is 16 million colors. You hear that a lot about screens. There's like, this screen reproduces 16 million colors. And in sound, it's a different thing that you have a sampling world to sample over, but it's the same kind of thing as color is. So think of all the colors that are available. In sound, you're sampling, there's a term of color in sound. You have 16 million differentiators that you can record in that 1/44,000th of a second. So in that little second that you capture, you get to pick, the system picks one of those 16 million available levels to say, hey, it's at this level at this period of time, reproduce it this way next time it comes out. So the color corollary is, hey, it's red right now,
right.
So make it red next time at this little slice in
right.
the sample.
And then the next slice, it's a slightly different red. And if you don't have the bit depth to record the difference between the two of those, then it's just the computer's just going to go, nope, that's the same red, and not change it.
Yeah, it's
right. And it's the same thing with frequencies, right? So if it doesn't change enough that the system can recognize it based on bit depth, it's just going to say, same sound, that stays the same. Same sound, that stays the same.
That's
at a bit depth of 1, everything would sound like meh.
Yeah.
Because you could only record that one frequency and play it back.
Yep. Precisely. That's a great segue into compression, by the way.
So the thing about you could get infinitely huge with this with data size is, well, we the same way we've done with pictures, we've hit a point where we could increase resolution of the sound if we wanted to, but it really only needs to be high enough to fool your ear.
Yep. Exactly.
And so we don't want to make files bigger than we have to, because there's a certain inconvenience to transferring this media around. Like, records might be great for the vibe that they have, but carrying a record around with you is obnoxious.
Try fitting 2,000 records in your pocket.
Right?
Ain't gonna happen.
But with digital, you can take that record and you can say, okay, let's pull the data off of that and let's compress it, which I'll let you run through in a second what compression is, and make it so that we can carry it around. So the portability and the deliverability of music is very important to us. As humans, like we're preoccupied with it, the reproduction of this particular reality. And we could go in all kinds of conversations, like down all kinds of philosophical rabbit holes about why music is so important. But that's not what we're here for today. We're here to tell you whether or not Apple is crazy for removing the headphone jack, right? So
we got to go down a few rabbit holes. Maybe that's just, we'll go down the socially accepted technological business Zen.
So
rabbit
so
hole.
talk to me about compression. Like what's happening in between. So the initial files when I save this podcast are gigabytes. If I save them in a minimally compressed format.
Yeah.
I chop it down through compression algorithms to
Spells. We'll call them spells.
48 megabytes so that it can stream to you over your podcast app. And part of why we can get away with that is because for speaking, it doesn't matter that much. You're not going to be offended by my voice not being crystal clear. But talk about what that algorithm is doing that makes it less clear.
Well, first of all, compression is a rabbit hole in and of itself. It's
a doctoral degree.
In a way, it's a mathematical pursuit, kind of, because you're analyzing information. You're looking for ways to eliminate extraneous information and reduce something down as small as possible and still get back out what you put in. And so your example earlier when you were talking about a bit depth of 1, where if you only had one volume level or one color level to pick from, everything's going to look or sound the same. And so the next sample, you're stuck with the same sound. The next sample, you're stuck with the same sound. That idea is kind of at least one type of compression that you can think about. And so the reason like a spoken word piece compresses a lot better than a song is because a song's much more dynamic. There's a lot more going on. And so between those samples, it tends to change more frequently. When it's just us talking, there's a lot of silence, right? And so say there's a second of silence, or say there's a half second of silence between me saying something and you responding to it. In that half second, this computer is recording 22,000 samples. Now, when you run a compression algorithm over that, the compression algorithm is going to look at that half second, those 22,000 samples, and it's going to say, these are the same thing. So I'm going to somehow magically with mathematics create a marker here that says this half second is the same thing and reduce those 22,000 samples to 1. That's probably not actually how it happens. I've never actually worked with compression algorithms, but conceptually, that's one of the ways it works. And so you see that in there's a version of MP3s. If you've ever like made your own MP3s or ripped CDs, it's called variable bitrate compression. That's another one where it kind of says, hey, I'm going to kind of scan over this sound recording, and anywhere I can, I'm going to reduce the resolution because I don't need it. And in a spoken word podcast, you just don't need very much resolution. There aren't cymbals, there aren't drums, there aren't like high voices singing, there aren't guitars jamming out. And so it's a very simple sound, and it's easy to remove a lot of that resolution that you don't need. Like you don't need the reds and the blues and the purples. You just need like the green and the yellow maybe. So
right.
Just making up
sort
colors.
of like black and white, right? Like, so the vocal range actually falls, I don't remember anymore from my classes, but like they know the range. Like voices fall within 1 to 2 kilohertz, I think, in terms of their frequency range.
Something like that,
Which means an algorithm can go out and cut out any sound that isn't in that range without you being like, oh, that voice sounds bad. If there were like a tambourine playing behind me while I talked, then that tambourine, like to get it in there, you have to store more data because that's a high sound that's happening at the same time as a low sound. And to store that digitally as a representation of the waveform that includes all of those sounds, like it's going to cost you more data. But so the idea of different compression algorithms is essentially like if you have a spot that is silence, the computer can recognize that it's silence, and instead of storing filling all of those bits with information, it just says anywhere you see this particular pattern on the user side, replace it with silence. So instead of the data file carrying this piece, it carries one tiny little tag, and that one tiny little tag tells your phone or your CD player, reproduce silence in this spot. And it goes, cool, which is real easy because it just means it doesn't do anything. which is way better than filling up all those bits with, say, zeros to prove that it's nothing.
And so that is, if you're familiar with CDs, which some of our listeners maybe aren't, although I think our demographic skews a little old. CDs are recorded with wave files, WAV files, and they are that really high bit rate and really high sampling rate that we were talking about earlier.
They're AIFF files, right?
Maybe they are.
Format? Either way,
right.
it's super minimally compressed.
Really high. And so you write to the CD basically what the system picks up. Probably at the time of CDs when they were invented, that was probably some of the highest resolution digital converters available to create that information. So it's probably pushing the technology. I'm sure we can do much, much higher now, but there's just no reason to, like we talked about. And then all of a sudden MP3s came on the scene in the year 2000. And so MP3s are, they're all different levels of, you can control the bit rate and the sampling rate. And basically we just settled on some at the time when they first came out that were pretty low level, 128, I don't even remember that's kbps.
Initial was
per second,
96 or something.
Oh, and that's not even relevant. That's not actually a measurement of those two things. It's a made up.
That's a completely different question, right?
Different
but they're
measurement.
all representations of the extent to which it takes an actual measured representation of the wave that hit the mic and replaces it with math that can be redone based on an agreed upon protocol on the other side of delivering the information. Right? I mean, that's what it is. It's like MP3.
Absolutely.
It's just a
Your word
communication
choice is
protocol.
Impeccable this morning.
For like, we're gonna because we're getting into the territory that this is like my bread and butter. This idea that like the idea of MP3 as a thing, like all a compression algorithm is an agreement that you're going to decode it a certain way on the other side, and as long as you adhere to that agreement, you maintain a consistency of data.
Mm-hmm.
But like MP3's trade-off was, we're making this a tiny file so we can get it to you, but it's going to sound pretty shitty.
Yeah, we had to get it to you over a dial-up modem back in the year 2000. And so it had to be a really small file. You couldn't transmit a CD. A CD holds like 650 megabytes, which at the time would have taken weeks maybe to get to your computer over the internet. And so compression is like a really, really, really important technology. Every single thing you do all day long on your computers involves many layers of compression and decompression to make it happen. And as computers get better and the internet gets faster, that becomes less of an issue, but we also want to push more. We now stream Netflix. You watch movies. I mean, movies are humongous. So compression's conceptually, it kind of is a simple concept. It's like remove stuff that we don't need and simplify down the document. Don't send me a 1,000-page book. Send me the executive summary that's a few pages. But it's really important. It's a really important digital concept.
And so my question consistently is, with an awareness of compression and that delivery trade-off, when you hear people get upset because Apple's making certain decisions that are driving them toward a standard of like wireless that they're not used to, mm-hmm. it's a question of delivery mechanism, right? Like they're mm-hmm. altering the way that this sound gets to your ear in some path. And in this case, they're proposing that we not use wires.
Magic.
And then it ends up being this argument because of how important music is to us. But like, it's also worth talking about the progression of delivery of music because it's so important, right? Like when all we had was a mono channel transistor radio, people still used it. They didn't, I mean, I'm sure there were people that were like, this doesn't sound like being there live, but like everybody used it. It's
well, so they didn't just use it. They absolutely marveled at it. I mean,
right. It was
just magic whispered magic into the microphone, but it's freaking magic. You can't see it. You can't touch it. It was transmitted via magic that we discovered that's floating all around us at all times. And we're sending information that way. It's absolutely incredible.
Oh, here's the other thing that happens every day. The dog downstairs is freaking out because its owner just left.
Oh, poor puppy.
But to that dog, radio waves are magic. But what I think is interesting in the idea of radio waves is like broadcast. We've been broadcasting music for public consumption, like for a long time. And so when you talk about dropping a wire that goes from your phone to your headphones, like you're talking about the same technology, essentially. It's different antennas and different standards of communication, but you're still talking about the same mode of transmitting information. Which is all this is all like. So the thing I thought of when you're talking about CDs is, the CD was of a certain quality, and because it contained all the information they could pack on there, and that was like 12 songs, right? And I don't know if that was all the information they could put on there or how the compression worked exactly. It was sort of a standard that was set because that's the songs that fit on a vinyl record, which was the standard before that stuff. But with MP3s, you could use the same CD to put like 500 songs on. And so that's what we spent our childhood doing, was like, here's this whole, every song I've ever owned. You can have it. Right? Instant reproduction is one of the things about digital also. That
was the iPod launch. I think the iPod launched with like 1,000 or 2,000 songs in your pocket. That was their, I mean, that's incredible. That's like 80 CDs in your pocket. That was most people's, that was like 2-3 times most kids' CDs collections. It was absolutely incredible.
And so part of what they were doing is by not transmitting it like a radio wave through a medium that caused you to limit the depth of that data stream, they made it so you could have access to a much higher quality version of a audio file than you had with radio, but still not as high quality as you had with a CD.
But that didn't last long.
And we've been fighting that war forever.
That
what
war
we're looking at right now is streaming.
That war was won pretty quickly.
Yeah, you're right.
5-10 years, and we've reached the point where you can't tell the difference most of the time. But there are all kinds of other things that affect sound quality. So,
except there's no physical media required for that to get to you. And so what Apple proposes to do now is sort of like a 2-tiered shift that's worth sort of breaking down. We've hit a point where delivery and compression are not the problems. Can we squeeze this up into a way to get it to you instantaneously without you knowing the difference between what was recorded in the studio, or at the event or whatever? And so now we have this kind of like what they'd call a last mile problem, where there's still limiting factors in your phone that are messing with the experience of getting that sound to your ears. And some of that is convenience, and some of it is actual technology, right? So do you want to first talk about like the idea of a digital audio converter and what opens up when you're not using a 3.5 millimeter standard? Like there's a limitation to the mini stereo plug that we use every day.
So it's an interesting space, as I was thinking about this morning, because phones right now, CD players, whatever, you plug a small headphone plug in there, a 1/8 inch or whatever, 1/8 inch analog plug. It's a piece of metal that makes contact with another piece of metal inside the phone, and it gets an electrical signal. The electrical signal goes out to your headphones, vibrates a diaphragm, or however modern headphones work. They do some other things too, but it reproduces sound, and it's analog. Your headphone set, it uses electricity. So think if something's using electricity for sound reproduction, it's an analog tool. If there's a computer chip doing something, it's digital. And so at the point of your phone where you plug your headphones in, that's an analog signal that you're getting out. It's the same kind of thing that you get from a record. A record never has a digital signal. It's always analog. But
and it's important to realize that that's electrical also. Like it's taking a little bit of power to run a signal up that wire to push the speaker to create the wave that goes into your ear, right? It's minimal, but what's happening there is electrical impulses being passed through this wire.
Yeah. A fun little aside here is just that microphones and speakers, are basically the same thing. I mean, they're not. They're made different. They're specialized now. But I think you can actually use a speaker as a microphone if you have to. Microphone's usually too small to use as a speaker, but it's the same thing happening. It's just
a
the same
microphone
thing
will reproduce a really high sound if you run it backwards. They don't jiggle as much, so they can only make tight
jiggle, 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 jiggle.
But you could get a microphone to go wee at you if you plugged it up. It'd probably wreck the microphone.
For sure. So what was I talking about? Oh, the headphones. So you've got your current headphones, right? You plug them in their analog signal. And so the problem that's being solved here is not one of transmission anymore. It's purely a problem of convenience. People don't want a cord connecting their sound device to their phones anymore, which I agree with. It's kind of a pain to have a cord hanging there, but this really has nothing to do with quality or delivery or anything. It's literally just people don't want a cord. We're going to move the industry that direction because we can. Because what's actually happening is they're making the system way more complex than it needs to be. Your phone already has a digital to analog converter in it. That's how it goes from the microchip that's in your phone to an electrical signal that goes out to your headphones. And it's already at the end point. You're physically plugging the speaker into your phone. There's no reason to have a digital signal go any further. And so the problem now is, though, well, wait, we want to transmit this over magic. We want to transmit this over Bluetooth, which uses electromagnetic frequencies, which is light or radio waves, essentially. And so what they've had to do is create this wildly complex piece of technology. These wireless headphones have computers in them. They're little tiny computers that you're putting in your ears. And so they have a EM antenna in them. They're picking up the electromagnetic radiation. They're picking up that digital signal coming over Bluetooth. And then their little computer is converting that to an analog signal that then moves a diaphragm inside of the headphones. And so you're really just taking something that's inside the phone right now, and because we want to cut the wires, you're moving it out into the headphones. And that's one of the reasons the headphones have to be expensive. It's why Bluetooth headphones are so much more expensive. There's you're putting a tiny computer in them. So
tiny computer in there, right? And that also necessarily, so what Bluetooth is, when they say Bluetooth, it's another communication protocol. Like I was saying, it's an agreement about how things will be compressed up in a way that we drop as little quality as possible while maximizing the ability to get that sound through your environment to you, right? Because there's interference, there's other signals, there's all kinds of shit around us now.
Tons of stuff.
Wi-Fi, whatever, wireless telephones, cell phone signals, all kinds of things that can interfere with that signal, right? Mm-hmm. And so when they talk about Bluetooth being shitty, they're talking about the trade-off of it basically has to be recompressed in some fashion to get through space to the computer in your ear, which is going to decode it and then play it as a sound.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that takes time, which results in lag. For a long time, the problem with Bluetooth and computers was you couldn't watch a video because the sound would lag getting to your ear and stuff would be out of sync.
Mm-hmm.
But we've solved that, right? Because are you currently using wireless headphones?
I'm not. There's still, my guess is a few, 100 milliseconds of delay on my headphones. So, and there's just so much going on.
It's the cable.
Yes.
But it's interesting considering the convenience trade-off, because the transistor radio is a great example where it was just magical. And so we didn't care. We don't want music to go away. And for most people, listening to a set of Bluetooth headphones, and I guarantee you Apple knows the numbers on this, how many people are using aftermarket headphones and how many people are just using their earbuds. Mm-hmm. But their earbuds are cheap and crappy.
They're very cheap.
I mean, they're way better than what a transistor radio would cost you, but they're not the best that's out there. And I think that's how most people listen to their music. So wireless is not going to be any worse than that. So it's really not a quality question. It's a convenience question. And convenience has reliably won when it comes to sound reproduction.
That's a very good observation. That's a great point, right? We want the aspect of sound that is meaningful to us which clearly is not reproducing it perfectly. We want the information. We want the noises. We want the words that people are saying. We want to hear a guitar strummed so badly that we're willing to reduce that to this crackly, incoherent, inconsistent sound that comes from all of these different technologies that we've used to reproduce that over the years. I mean, if you go listen to an original radio, it sounds terrible. And it's all a technology growth.
Part of that radio voice, like I was doing before, where you talk like this and you have this sort of blah, 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 was actually about technological limitations. Like part of it is what we could record, like the spectrum we could record, the spectrum we could reproduce. And so radio announcers talked in this range that came through those shitty speakers and worked. You could understand what they were saying if they talked like this. Like it's not that everyone walked around every day going, "Hey there, Brian, how are you today?" Like people talked like normal people. Okay, so I think the last piece of this comes down to the part I was going to put first, but you were right. It's better to talk about the wireless thing, right? Because that's what applies to everyone. If the user experience gets convenient enough, there's not going to be enough degradation via wireless that the world at large is going to go, "Oh, fuck this iPhone. I'm getting something else so I can have my plug back."
Well, I also think it's important to mention that there is no degradation anymore. Modern Bluetooth, we're on version 4, I think, of Bluetooth.
That is to say, we can't tell the difference, right? There's a change happening to make it move.
Sure.
That's that communication standard, right? But we can't tell the difference because of our sensory mechanism.
Yeah, our bodies can't tell the difference. You might even be able to, I don't know these numbers off the top of my head, but you might even be able to transmit CD quality sound over Bluetooth now. So
I mean, it's doable.
All
there's certain limitations about power and chips and things like that, right? You need a bigger battery, you need a better chip, you need stuff like that, which is part of why Apple wants to develop their own chips for wireless, so that they have.
They developed a special chip just for their new wireless headphones. It has its own processor in it that's specifically for being a wireless headphone. They moved a bunch of the sensors that were in the phone, they put them in the headphone. It senses motion. It's doing its own decoding. It's crazy. It
senses other sounds to
getting off topic.
Calibrate so the other stuff sounds good, which is we should do a completely different episode on noise canceling, and because the physics of that stuff is remarkable.
Everything is a computer.
But I think the last piece of this is to talk about the other side, which is the DAC, the digital to analog converter.
Yeah.
So like in the audiophile world, like people that really, really care about, forget the people we were just talking about that are just like, I just want to have music and I want it to be not offensively bad. Like the people that really, really care about this stuff, they go and buy aftermarket units. You have one that's rack sized. You have one the size of a VCR that you used to use, right?
It's a little thinner than a VCR probably.
The sole purpose of that device was to take that digital signal and with maximal clarity turn it into an analog signal.
Yeah. You take
so that you could drive speakers.
Yeah. And it's interesting because one side of that equation is I think a lot simpler. The digital side, I mean, you've got this information. It's absolute information. It's when you convert that digital information back into real world signals that you have to build a really nice device to do it well. You're converting it into a clean electrical signal, which is a clean flow of electrons in a wire, a clean flow of water through a pipe. And you, depending on the device you're using to do it, you need a bigger, better device. A bigger device often will do that better. I mean, our technology these days is absolutely wild. I mean, you have digital analog converters that are microscopic that do an absolutely fantastic job. So I don't know. I've always been a little skeptical of the hi-fi market, but again, it comes back to what you can hear. Go test. Right. You go test it, and if you like it, if it sounds
as a representation of the market, you can look at what they do sell. Right. So the one that you used to have was this big rack unit.
It was big.
I've never owned a exclusive DAC that was just for that.
I got it.
But the one they sell them now, and they are the size of the phone itself. Like what you buy if you're hi-fi obsessed these days.
Oh, I see a lot of those. Yeah,
is still the size of the phone itself, and it usually plugs into the phone via the lightning cable, right? So, like that's still about the size of that device. And so, what Apple's looking at is, in order to increase the audio quality, even through a cord, like they would have to put they would have to double the size of the phone to make the people that really do care about audio happy.
Yeah,
right?
with the,
and that's
with
not
the old,
acceptable to all the other people that don't really give a shit.
right. Yeah, with the old mechanism, when we were limited to plugging our phone into a stereo via the headphone jack, I might be misspeaking here, but I'm pretty sure I'm not. The analog to, or the digital analog converter in your phone is always going to be worse than, say, in a nice receiver at your house. So if you can get the digital signal out of your phone and into something that has a better converter that's going to make that electrical signal cleaner and smoother and transmit it to your speakers better with more power, it's going to sound better. And partly it is a matter of technological advancement, but it's also a bigger unit works better here. You have the unit that's converting has better resolution. There's this like meta compression thing going on even in the real analog world. And so by moving when you basically want to keep stuff as a digital signal as long as possible. You want to convert that in isolation and as close to your speaker as possible. And so in a way, these new headphones, a Bluetooth set of headphones, kind of is doing that. It's moving it closer to the speaker, there are some components.
Well, and it's going to be limited by what I was saying before. Again, like how big you can make the chip, how much power you can draw in order to do that, which means in a wireless headphone, that means that battery's got to be on the headphone.
It's crazy.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but if you're talking about super audiophile stuff, there's this problem now of, well, headphones are this speaker mechanism and they're attached to a wire, and that wire's got to go to something else. And that, if you're going the audiophile route, is the DAC. And that DAC is the size of a phone. Well, if you just take the volume of that phone and you drop the DAC, like, so by taking out the headphone jack, Apple buys itself in its own enclosure, the size of a nickel worth of space, right? Mm-hmm. But they can use that for some pretty cool stuff, cameras, batteries, stuff like that.
You can do a lot with a nickel in a phone these days.
And they also offload the analog conversion, which means that people can start to make headphones like through the lightning. And so one of the other limitations of the small jack is it doesn't transmit power. Like electricity flows through this wire, but it doesn't actually, like, you can't plug in a set of headphones and then run another computer off of the power that you can draw off of that jack. But you can off of a lightning port. And so by having a single port that you plug into, they can take all the circuitry that would go in that block the size of a phone, orient it differently so it fits in a pair of headphones, and you can get the $1,000 quality digital audio converter that would otherwise be a brick the size of the phone, just built into some headphones. They're drawing power off of the lightning things. You don't need to put batteries in them all the time. And they sound the best that you could possibly have on your ears without a rack unit and speakers in your bedroom, right?
Doesn't get any better than that. You're not topping my speakers with headphones anytime soon.
So with this shift, they're simultaneously chasing two things, right? They're trying to increase the convenience of the listening experience for the people that don't care, and they're owning up to a certain limitation of this technology on the other side, which is we can't put a good enough DAC for the people that really care about this stuff into our device anymore without it causing a change in the device that makes everyone else go, I'm not buying it. Mm-hmm. Even though now they're saying that the headphone jack is the reason they're not buying it.
I think they're also doing a third thing that's unrelated to the device or the sound or the music. They are attempting to give you another device that you need to have on your person at all times. And this one in particular is headed in a direction that pretty soon is going to be small enough that it can go internally into your body. And so if they can get you to start wearing a headphone, like a lot of people wear their Bluetooth all day for work, if Apple can get you to start wearing this device at all times, you are getting used to another device that you need, that your body needs, that is important to you all day long, and that eventually is going to be an implantable device that you're going to get inside of your body.
Oh, snap. We should do Terminators next.
Yes.
You just described a cyborg. But if you think about it, we already
Real flash
we already
over
behave
metal.
that way, right? When you present it that way, it sounds kind of creepy, like, oh, geez. But
I
like,
like making it sound creepy.
we already do it. People already, like you said, they're already walking around with their Bluetooth. But beyond that, they're already walking around with I have my earbuds in my pocket anytime I leave the house, almost.
Yep. You've got a lot of
In case I need
technologies.
to make a call, right? Like,
You've got keys. That's an incredible technology that took someone to invent.
yeah, we
You've
talked
got,
about that.
You've got credit cards. Those that use magnetic strips to transmit information. Those are in your pocket at all
Those
times.
chip ones have a computer on board. That little security chip is a computer.
It's a computer.
You don't know it.
You know what else you've got? You've got pants most of the time. Pants are fucking technology, and people don't think about that.
Oh, fuck yeah. It keeps dirt off my shit. I love it.
Keeps you from scuffing your knees and minor falls.
My pants technology in minor falls. Anyway, I feel like that covered pretty much everything you need to know to kind of understand what's going on there. I don't mean it to sound pro Apple, but they're not making this decision willy-nilly, and they're not making it so they can control the ecosystem like a lot of naysayers have been saying. Like, if you chase down the channel of trying to improve every piece and to the last mile problem, eventually that 3mm or 3.5mm connector is antiquated, because it means that DAC has got to be on the device. And maybe that's good enough for most people, but if they want to keep chasing professionals and crazy people, it's not good enough anymore. Wireless, though, is good for most people, and I think more convenient once you sort of get used to a life of wireless stuff.
Wireless is obviously the direction technology wants to go, and that we want technology to go. So in terms of just, is this a move that will drive an industry forward? I think absolutely. So I think it's an interesting move because it's making things much more complicated. A pair of Bluetooth headphones is vastly more complex than a pair of headphones that just plugs in with a 1/8 inch analog headphone jack. I mean, that's why you can buy those for $2.
Technologically more complicated.
Yeah,
which means that the experience is going to get a little more complicated. And so what I sort of trust out of Apple, at least their track record, has been that they don't implement a particular technology as part of their ecosystem until the user experience is easy enough that, like, my grandmother can handle it. And maybe they shoot short, right? But like by putting it out, they can start to get data on how people behave. And the second or third iteration of this is going to be like rock solid.
It'll be wonderful when my headphones are the size of the end of my pinky finger. I can't see them. They're in my ear at all times, and they block out sounds that I don't like hearing in the world and produce sounds that I want to hear over top of other stuff. It'll be wild. There's startups that do that now. They have apps that you put their headphones in, and they have noise canceling, but it's not just noise canceling, it's selective sound canceling. And so you can like cancel out the sound of traffic. You can cancel out the sound of a crying baby. I doubt it works super well, but it probably works somewhat. So it's really,
you're getting
really
to pick
cool
what stays in the data stream of the simulation and what doesn't.
Of the real world / simulation that we live in. Yeah. And that's, I love that extension of this conversation because it naturally always goes to, is this a simulation, and then does it matter?
Does it matter? But then
thing.
But it so follows from the idea that with this obsession that we have, that we keep talking about whenever we talk about technology on this podcast, we end up talking about this reproduction. Like, can we reproduce reality within our own world? There's no reason to not expect that the furthest extension of that impulse to do that will certainly result in the ability to create a high fidelity reproduction if we want, to the point that we can't tell the difference. We may not want to.
Bullshit. Of course we want to.
We're going towards the ability to do it, right? Like the fact that you want to reproduce it and watch it means you can reproduce it. And we're always chasing better fidelity for that reproduction. So at some point it's going to be like, whoa, I didn't know I wasn't in that place.
Right.
In the Matrix.
It's crazy. And then who cares?
So happy Tuesday, y'all.
Happy Tuesday. Is it Tuesday? Nice.
It is.
Oh, we're right on schedule. We nailed this.
Bam.
This came out good. What do you think the odds are that we recorded it correctly and don't have to redo it for a fifth time?
Statistically speaking, based on attempts to record this exact conversation,
0% chance.
There's a totally.
I think we got it. I see squiggles. Oh wait, I don't see squiggles. I see little lines and stuff though.
Yeah. There's no squiggles anymore.
Hey, let's
But,
address one more
hey.
thing for people before we cut out. I bet a lot of people right now are thinking, well, shit, what should I buy? How do I get good sound?
Whatever feels good. All the shit they're trying
What
to
is it, a
sell
porn
you all
shop?
the time doesn't matter. The lowest quality of what they're trying to sell you at this point is good enough for you to enjoy music. If you enjoy what
There's-
you're hearing, it doesn't have to be better. You like try if you want, check out a better experience. If you find pleasure in that, okay. But you don't have to get better quality just because that's what they're selling you.
I'm
Is
gonna
that what
throw
you're
out a
looking
couple-
for?
Kind of. I was also looking for more specifics, but I realized I don't
Okay.
actually have them. I was going to throw out a couple things. One of my complaints with Apple headphones is that they don't have a rubberized ear insert. They're just a hard piece of plastic that doesn't actually fill your ear hole properly unless you happen to be the shape of an Apple headphone. And so you don't get good bass reproduction unless you close off your ear canal. And so when you're looking for headphones, if you want to have really good sound, especially if you listen to music that has a lot of bass,
And
which
you're not
is
walking
most
on a
music-
city street where you want to hear external noise so you don't get run over by a car.
Right. You want a big fat chunk of rubber on the end of your little insert headphone that goes
Plug-in
in your
hole.
ear, plugs that hole. Your bass reproduction will go through the roof. So if you have Apple headphones right now, you don't need to spend a lot. There are tons of headphones on Amazon or online that are like 15 or 20 bucks and have awesome sound. I don't have the name of the brand that I have, but I did a lot of researching, a lot of testing. I think these were like 12 bucks. I bought a couple pairs of them and they have killer sound. I mean, they rival every other pair of headphones I've ever had. And someday we'll be posting these things to a blog, and maybe now, because we did a lot of work to clean things up and have like the ability to do things more easily now than we've ever had before. So we're very
Done
organized
in
as a podcast all of a
production
sudden.
workflow. Which is how we're able to do this at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday.
Compression. We've compressed our data stream. We removed a bunch of needless stuff, and
Yeah, we don't need email.
so
email.
don't.
Yeah,
I
so
wouldn't-
thanks for hanging out. Check out the blog,
Yeah,
or whatever, wherever we'll put this somewhere. Maybe some links.
yeah.
And thanks for hanging out.
Scope
for
us a
another
bunch
one.
of places. We're
Yeah,
all
we're
over the
everywhere.
internet.
Just Google's Engineering Pod. We'll pop up all the places.
engineeringpodcast.com.
We're working on switching to Patreon, but go to Patreon if you want to and search for us if you
That's
want
where our
to,
site goes
to
now.
hear our explanation. Oh, you're right. So just go to zengineeringpod.com and you can get an explanation of how Patreon works and what it is.
Yeah, if you're enjoying our
let's keep
podcast,
the ship
check it
afloat.
out. It's great. We'll address it more later.
But
It'll be a
otherwise,
hit list topic.
we tend to talk to people on Twitter and share things over Facebook, hang out there, rate, review. That stuff makes a big difference for other people finding us through those channels. But thanks for hanging out. I'm Adam.
Thanks, everybody. I'm Brian, and it's a delightful morning, and I hope that wherever you are, the sun is shining.
They don't know what I know. They know
That was me shaking my head back and forth so I could hear the sound of the pressure waves.
Don't forget to do that. That's a great little home experiment to do. Just don't hurt your neck.